now, and so to be able to critique the fundamental premise that there was Muhammad and he's responsible for this religion is vital. So I'm glad you've done this, and you are a scholar in the field. So, I mean, tell us the answer. It's a rhetorical question. Did Muhammad exist?
If you mean Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, the famous warrior and polygamist and pedophile and all these things, then no, Muhammad did not exist in that form. There is no record, no indication of that man existing up until 125 years after his death. And when we first do start hearing about him, we hear about him from warring factions within the leadership of the Arab Empire, who were using this newly minted prophet and attributing words to him to support their own positions. And so the hadith, the traditions of Muhammad's words and deeds, are a mass of contradictions, a mass of self-contradictory material that was all fabricated for political purposes. For the first 60 years after the Arab conquests began in the 630s, there was no mention from anyone, either of the conquerors or the conquered people, of the conquerors having a new religion or prophet or holy book. And so that's extraordinarily strange, Michael, if you think about it, because the Muslims, the Arab conquerors, were supposed to have been streaming out of Arabia with the words of the Quran and Muhammad on their lips, and that was what energized the conquests. And yet they never mentioned him. It's as if we all know that World War II came about because of Hitler and Nazism, and it's as if there was no mention of Hitler or Nazism all the way during World War II and for 60 years after it, and we only started hearing about it now. It would be an extraordinary historical omission that would cast the whole story into question, and that's what we have with the case of Muhammad and Islam. But there are a lot of exceedingly strange things. I mean, like, for example, in the book I show some pictures of some coins that the Arab Empire very early on minted in the 640s and 650s, just 20 years after the conquests began. And the coins actually say Muhammad, and so people usually think, oh, well, that's Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, and there's your whole thing. What are you talking about in this book? But if you turn the coins over on the obverse, they have two things about them. First, an image of a ruler, and Islam forbids images, and the ruler is carrying a cross. Now, the cross is anathema to Islam. And in the Islam, Jesus is a Muslim prophet who's going to come back and break all the crosses. So the idea that Muslim rulers would mint coins with images and crosses on them, it beggars belief, and it shows that Islam in its form today simply did not exist at that time. Adding to this is the fact that we hear nothing whatsoever about who or what this Muhammad is, and the word Muhammad actually means the praised one, which appears to have been a title that was applied to various people, notably to Jesus himself, and did not refer to a separate individual. We don't start hearing about an individual named Muhammad who was some sort of a prophet until the 690s, 50, 60 some years after the Arab conquests began.
So the word Muhammad, the name Muhammad on the back of those coins with a ruler, a leader with the cross, could just be referring to another way of describing Jesus.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you have, as a matter of fact, there's even an echo of that in the Quran itself, because it says, it only mentions Muhammad 4 times, which is a very interesting thing in itself, since it mentions Moses 136 times, and many, many of the other biblical prophets and biblical figures, many more times than it does Muhammad. And yet Muhammad is the focus and the center of Islam. That all came about separately and afterward. In the Quran, Muhammad is barely mentioned, and when he is, every time, it doesn't necessarily refer to Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, at all. For example, it says at one point, Muhammad is only the servant of Allah and his messenger. And then at a later point it says, Jesus is only the servant of Allah and his messenger, which also suggests, as do some of the early references to Muhammad specifically, that this was a title that was being applied to Jesus, and this whole thing was a reply to it was a Christological controversy. The Orthodox Christology, of course, the teachings of the Catholic and Orthodox Church, which was a unified church in those days, was that Jesus was divine, and there was a faction coming out of the Middle East that was the remnants of some of the early heresies in the church that was saying, no, we believe in Jesus, but he was not divine. He was only the servant of God and his messenger. And he was the praised one, but he was not the Son of God. And that is, of course, what eventually became was appropriated by the Arab emperors as Muhammad, the praised one, as the servant of the law and his messenger, and the centerpiece of a new religion that was created in order to support the new Arab empire that had come about.